Preston Blackwood was not asleep. His eyes were closed. His breathing was slow and deliberate, each exhale a carefully measured performance. His weathered hands rested on the armrests of his leather chair, one finger draped dangerously close to a thick stack of $100 bills. To anyone watching, he looked like an exhausted old man surrendering to an afternoon rest. But behind his eyelids, Preston was hunting. This was a game Preston had perfected over 50 years. He was 72 years old, and he had built an empire that swallowed smaller companies whole. He owned office towers, pharmaceutical patents, and enough real estate to house a small city. He had accumulated everything a man could want, except for one thing: proof that he had been right all along. Over the decades, Preston had grown cold. His ex-wife had left him for a younger architect, taking half his fortune with her. His adult children called twice a year, on Christmas and on his birthday, and both conversations inevitably circled back to inheritance. His business partners praised him at board meetings, but plotted against him in private emails he paid hackers to intercept. Even his household staff had disappointed him. A butler had pocketed cash from his wallet. A cook had sold stories about him to tabloids. A driver had taken expensive wine bottles from the cellar. Preston had come to believe in a simple, brutal truth: every person has a price. He believed that when given the opportunity to take something without consequence, human nature would always choose theft over integrity. Today he would prove it once more. Outside the tall windows of his study, rain hammered against the glass like accusations. Inside, a gas fireplace provided an amber glow that cast dancing shadows across mahogany bookshelves. Preston had arranged everything meticulously. On the side table next to his chair, positioned exactly 3 inches from his right hand, sat an envelope. It was open. Crisp $100 bills fanned out like playing cards, deliberately messy, as if forgotten by a careless billionaire losing his mental edge. $4,000 in cash, more than enough to tempt anyone struggling to survive. Preston waited, controlling his breathing to mimic sleep. He heard the brass doorknob turn with a quiet click. A woman named Renee entered the study. Renee was his newest housekeeper. She had worked at the Blackwood estate for only 3 weeks. She appeared to be in her early 30s, but exhaustion had aged her face. Dark crescents hung beneath her eyes, telling stories of double shifts and unpaid bills. Renee was a single mother. Preston knew this from the background check his security firm had conducted. Her ex-husband had abandoned the family when their son was 2, leaving her with nothing but a rusted sedan and a mountain of medical debt from a difficult pregnancy. Today was Saturday, and normally Renee worked her shift alone. But today the elementary schools had closed due to a burst water pipe, and the city had declared the building unsafe until Monday. Renee had no money for childcare. She had called Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, 3 times that morning, begging permission to bring her son to work. She had promised he would be invisible, silent, perfect. Mrs. Chen had finally relented, warning Renee in a tight voice that if Mr. Blackwood discovered the child, both mother and son would be escorted off the property permanently. Preston heard 2 sets of footsteps. The first was the soft padding of worn sneakers on Persian rugs. The second was lighter, smaller, hesitant. "Stay right here, Malik," Renee whispered. Her voice carried the tremor of someone balancing on a tightrope. "Sit on that cushion by the bookshelf. Don't move. Don't touch a single thing. Don't make any noise. Mr. Blackwood is resting in his chair. If you wake him, Mommy loses her job. If I lose this job, we lose our apartment. Do you understand me, baby?" "Yes, Mama," a small voice answered, barely louder than the rain. Preston, maintaining his facade of sleep, felt an unexpected flicker of interest. The boy's voice didn't carry rebellion or mischief. It carried fear. "I have to go clean the marble floors in the entrance hall," Renee whispered urgently. "It'll take me about 10 minutes. Please, Malik. Please be good." "I promise, Mama." Preston heard the door close softly. Renee was gone. Now it was just the billionaire and the child. For a long moment, silence filled the study. The only sounds were the artificial crackle of the gas fireplace and the rhythmic ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Preston kept his breathing steady, theatrical, convincing, but every sense was sharpened, listening, waiting for the moment when the boy would reach for the money. The test had begun. 3 hours earlier, Preston Blackwood had been sitting at the same desk, but his eyes had been open and filled with ice. His iPhone was pressed against his ear, and on the other end of the line, a corporate attorney named Mitchell was stammering through an explanation. "Mr. Blackwood, I can explain. The decimal point in the contract was wrong," Preston cut him off. His voice was quiet, which made it more terrifying than shouting. "You filed a document with the Securities and Exchange Commission that listed our quarterly earnings as 43 million instead of 4.3 million. Do you understand what you've done, Mitchell?" "Sir, it was a typographical error. We caught it within the hour and submitted a correction." "You made me look senile," Preston said, each word dropping like a stone into still water. "The Wall Street Journal is running a story tomorrow questioning whether I'm losing my grip on reality. Competitors are circling. Our stock dropped 2% in an hour. 2% of a $12 billion company, Mitchell. Do the math." There was silence on the line except for Mitchell's ragged breathing. "You've been with the firm for 11 years, Preston continued. "You have a wife, 2 daughters in private school, a mortgage in Westchester. I know all of this because I know everything about everyone who works for me. And now, none of that matters. You're fired. Security will escort you out. Your severance package is void due to gross negligence. HR will send the paperwork." "Mr. Blackwood, please," Mitchell's voice cracked. "I have kids. I'll lose everything." Preston felt nothing. "You should have thought about that before you embarrassed me in front of the entire financial world. Goodbye, Mitchell." He ended the call and set the phone down with surgical precision, aligning it parallel to the edge of his desk. For a moment, he sat in the silence of his study, surrounded by walls of leather-bound books he had never read, and art he had purchased because advisors told him it would appreciate in value. His eyes drifted to the mahogany desk in front of him. In the corner sat 3 silver picture frames, each one expensive, each one empty. The frames had been a gift from his interior designer, who had assumed Preston would fill them with family photographs. That had been 7 years ago. The frames remained empty because Preston had no photographs worth displaying. His daughter Vanessa was 41 and lived in Monaco with her third husband, a professional polo player 20 years her junior. She had called Preston twice in the past year, both times to ask for money to invest in her husband's horse breeding business. His son Marcus was 38 and ran a tech startup in San Francisco that burned through cash like kindling. Marcus sent quarterly emails with pitch decks, always ending with funding requests that Preston denied on principle. Preston stared at the empty frames and felt a familiar tightness in his chest that might have been loneliness in another man, but in him felt more like vindication. He had been right all along. People were equations, inputs and outputs, costs and benefits. Everyone wanted something, and no one gave anything without expecting a return. He had built an empire on this understanding. He had destroyed competitors by predicting their greed. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals by exploiting human weakness. And now, in his twilight years, he wanted to prove one final time that his philosophy was correct. That's when he had conceived of the test. Renee Martinez had arrived at the Blackwood estate at exactly 7:30 that morning, 30 minutes early, as always. She had driven her battered Honda Civic through streets slick with rain, praying the engine wouldn't stall at red lights like it had been doing lately. In the passenger seat beside her, Malik sat perfectly still, his small hands folded in his lap, his eyes wide and worried. "Remember what I told you," Renee said as she parked in the service area behind the mansion. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she turned off the ignition. "You have to be invisible today, baby. Like a shadow, like you're not even there." "I'll be good, Mama," Malik said quietly. He was 7 years old, small for his age, with gentle eyes that seemed too old for his face. He wore a faded red t-shirt that had been washed so many times the color had turned pink in places, and jeans with patches sewn carefully over the knees. His sneakers were worn thin at the soles, the rubber separating from the canvas near his left big toe. Renee had tried to glue it back together 3 times, but it kept peeling apart. In Malik's right hand, clutched like a talisman, was a small, die-cast toy car. It was a miniature sedan, once bright blue but now scratched and chipped, with flecks of paint missing along the roof. One of the doors no longer open, and the wheels were grimy from years of being rolled across sidewalks, playgrounds, and bedroom floors. But to Malik, it was treasure. It was the last thing his father had given him before he left, and Malik called it the king, because his father had told him that one day, if he took care of it, it would be worth $1 million. Malik knew that wasn't true now. He was old enough to understand that his father had lied about many things, but he still carried the king everywhere, and he still believed that something his father had touched still held some magic, some proof that he had once been loved. Mrs. Chen had met them at the service entrance, her face pinched with disapproval. "The boy stays out of sight," she had hissed at Renee. "If Mr. Blackwood sees him, you're both out. And I mean out, Renee. No reference letter, no severance, nothing." "I understand," Renee had whispered. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. Thank you so much." Now, hours later, as Renee stood in the doorway of Preston's study, with Malik half hidden behind her leg, she felt her heart hammering against her ribs. The old man was asleep in his chair, or appeared to be, and the sight of him, so still, so powerful even in rest, made her mouth go dry. She could see the money on the table next to him, more cash than she earned in 2 months, just sitting there like it meant nothing. She knelt down and gripped Malik's shoulders, looking directly into his eyes. "Stay on that cushion by the bookshelf," she breathed, her lips barely moving. "Don't touch anything. Not the books, not the furniture, nothing. And especially don't go near Mr. Blackwood. He's very, very important, and if you disturb him, we'll lose everything. Do you understand?" Malik nodded, his fingers tightening around the king. "I promise, Mama." Renee kissed his forehead quickly, tasting the fear on her own lips, and then hurried out of the room to clean the entrance hall, leaving her son alone with a sleeping billionaire and a trap neither of them understood. The door clicked shut with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet room. Malik sat frozen on the velvet cushion by the bookshelf, exactly where his mother had placed him. He didn't move. He barely breathed. His fingers wrapped tightly around the king, feeling the familiar grooves of the worn paint, the small chip on the roof where he had accidentally dropped it on the playground last year. The old man in the chair didn't stir. His chest rose and fell in slow, steady waves. His mouth was slightly open, and every few seconds a soft snoring sound emerged from his throat. Malik had never seen anyone so old up close before. The man's skin looked thin, like paper that might tear if you touched it, and his hands were covered in dark spots that Malik didn't understand. Malik wanted to look away, but he was afraid to move his head. His mother had said not to disturb the man, so he sat, and he watched, and he listened to the clock on the mantel. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Each second felt like an hour. Then Malik's eyes drifted sideways, and he saw the money. It was just sitting there on the table, an arm's length from the sleeping man. Green bills stacked and fanned out, some of them hanging halfway out of an envelope like they were trying to escape. Malik had never seen that much money in one place before. His mother counted dollars carefully at the grocery store, choosing the dented cans because they were cheaper. She had cried last month when the electricity bill came, and they had eaten nothing but rice and beans for a week. Malik stared at the money. He knew what a $100 bill looked like because his teacher had shown the class once during a math lesson. There were so many of them in that envelope. 10, 20, maybe more. His heart began to beat faster. Behind his closed eyelids, Preston waited. He could hear the boy's breathing change, becoming quicker and shallower. He had heard this pattern before, the pause before the theft, the moment when temptation overrode conscience. Preston's own breathing remained theatrical, perfectly timed, the performance of a man lost in deep sleep. He had positioned his hand near the money deliberately, close enough to make the boy nervous, but far enough to allow access. The trap was perfect. Malik's eyes moved from the money to the old man's face, then back to the money. His mother worked so hard. She scrubbed floors until her knees ached. She smiled when he asked for new shoes, even though he could see the worry behind her eyes. That money could buy so many things: food, medicine for when Mama's back hurt, maybe even fix the hole in his sneaker. Preston heard fabric rustle. The boy was moving. This was it, the moment of truth, the proof that poverty, given opportunity, would always choose survival over morality. Preston had seen it 100 times before. The boy would reach for the money, and Preston would catch him, and then he would show Renee exactly what her precious son really was. Preston kept his eyes closed and waited for the small hand to touch the cash. But the hand didn't reach for the money. Instead, Malik saw something else. A shiver ran through the old man's body, subtle but visible. His shoulders twitched slightly, and his hands contracted for just a moment before relaxing again. Malik's eyes followed the movement and noticed that one of the tall windows behind the chair had a small gap at the bottom where the seal had worn away. Cold air was seeping through, creating a draft that moved across the floor like an invisible river. The old man shivered again, this time more noticeably. Malik forgot about the money. He had seen his mother shiver like that during winter nights when they couldn't afford to keep the heat on all night, and she would pretend she wasn't cold so he wouldn't worry. The old man was wearing a suit and tie, but his legs looked thin under the expensive fabric, and his socks were just thin black dress socks that probably didn't keep him warm at all. Malik stood up slowly from the cushion, moving as quietly as he could. He glanced at the money on the table as he passed it, and without thinking, he reached out and gently pushed the envelope back toward the center of the table, where it couldn't fall. Some of the bills had been hanging so close to the edge that gravity might have pulled them to the floor. Malik didn't want the old man to wake up and think someone had tried to steal from him. Then Malik looked down at himself. He was wearing a thin jacket, a hand-me-down from a cousin that was slightly too big for him. It was navy blue with a broken zipper that his mother had replaced with safety pins. The fabric was worn, and there was a small stain on the sleeve from when he had spilled juice last month. But it was warm. It was the only jacket he owned. Malik carefully unzipped the safety pins and took off the jacket. The air in the room felt colder against his thin t-shirt, and goosebumps appeared on his arms immediately, but the old man needed it more. Old people got sick easier. His teacher had told them that once. Moving with the slow carefulness of someone approaching a sleeping dog, Malik stepped closer to the chair. He could smell expensive cologne and old leather, and something else he didn't recognize, maybe medicine. The old man's breathing continued in its steady rhythm, undisturbed. Malik gently draped his jacket over the old man's legs, trying to cover as much as he could. The jacket looked small and shabby against the fine fabric of the chair and the man's suit, like a sparrow's nest built in a cathedral. But it would help keep him warm. Malik made sure the jacket wouldn't slip off, tucking one edge slightly under the man's calf. Behind his closed eyelids, Preston Blackwood's world stopped. He had felt the boy approach. He had expected the grab, the theft, the confirmation of everything he believed about human nature. Instead, he felt fabric settling over his legs. Light fabric, worn fabric, fabric that carried the faint smell of laundry detergent in childhood. The boy had covered him. Preston's mind raced to make sense of it. Was this a distraction? A trick before the real theft? But he heard the boy's footsteps retreating, soft and quick, back toward the bookshelf. No rustle of papers, no crinkle of bills being pocketed. Nothing. For the first time in 50 years, Preston Blackwood didn't know what to do next. Then his rage found him. It wasn't real rage, not at first. It was the rage he had planned, the fury he had rehearsed in his mind for this exact moment. But as Preston's eyes snapped open and he saw the small, worn jacket draped across his legs, something else mixed into the performance. Confusion. Anger at being confused. And beneath it all, something that felt dangerously close to shame. He couldn't allow that. Preston erupted from his chair like a volcano. He grabbed the jacket with both hands and flung it across the room with such force that it hit the far wall and crumpled to the floor near the bookshelf. The violence of the movement sent the antique clock on the mantel rattling. "What is this?" Preston roared, his voice filling every corner of the study. "What is this filthy rag doing on my suit?" Malik scrambled backward, his eyes wide with terror, his back pressing against the bookshelf so hard that several leather-bound volumes shifted and tilted. The king fell from his hand and rolled across the carpet, coming to rest near Preston's feet. "Do you have any idea what this suit costs?" Preston continued, his face reddening, one finger jabbing toward his perfectly clean trousers. "Do you? This is Italian wool, custom tailored, and you've contaminated it with... He gestured violently at the jacket crumpled on the floor. "With whatever filth was on that disgusting thing." In the entrance hall, Renee heard the shouting. Her blood turned to ice. She dropped the spray bottle she had been using to clean the marble and ran, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Her mind raced through catastrophes. Malik had broken something. Malik had woken him. Malik had touched something valuable. They were finished. She burst through the study door, her breath coming in gasps, and the scene before her made her knees nearly buckle. Mr. Blackwood stood over her son, his face contorted with fury, pointing at Malik like he was something diseased. Malik was pressed against the bookshelf, trembling, his thin arms wrapped around himself. His jacket lay in a heap against the wall. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm so sorry." Renee rushed forward, positioning herself between the billionaire and her son. "I'm so sorry. He didn't mean, whatever he didn't mean any harm. Please, sir, he's just a child." "A child who has ruined a $5,000 suit," Preston snapped, his eyes cold and merciless. He pointed at his legs, at fabric that bore no stain, no mark, no evidence of damage whatsoever. "Look at this. Ruined. That jacket of his was covered in God knows what, dirt, germs, poverty, and now it's contaminated my clothing." Renee's hands shook as she looked at the suit. She could see nothing wrong with it. It looked immaculate, but she was a maid, and he was Preston Blackwood, and who was she to question what he saw? "I'll pay for the dry cleaning," she whispered, though she had no idea how. "I'll pay for whatever it costs to fix it. Please don't fire us, please." "Dry cleaning?" Preston's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You think dry cleaning can fix this? This suit is destroyed, contaminated. I'll have to throw it away. $5,000, gone, because your son couldn't keep his hands to himself." He looked down at Malik, who was now crying silently, tears streaming down his face but making no sound, as if even his grief was trying to be invisible. "I want reimbursement," Preston said coldly. $200, right now, or both of you are out, and I'll make sure no one in this city ever hires you again." Renee's breath caught in her throat. $200. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Her hands moved automatically to her pockets, patting the thin fabric of her work uniform, even though she already knew what she would find. Nothing. She had $17 in her purse, locked in her car in the service parking area. $17 that was supposed to buy groceries for the next 3 days. She had $43 in her checking account, barely enough to cover the minimum payment on her credit card that was already 2 weeks overdue. I don't, her voice broke. She tried again. I don't have that much with me, Mr. Blackwood, but I can pay you. I swear I can. I get paid on Friday. I can give you everything from my paycheck. Or I can work extra hours. I'll work for free, whatever you need. I need $200 right now, Preston repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. He looked at her the way someone might look at a malfunctioning appliance. Not Friday, not next week, now. Renee felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She wiped at them quickly with the back of her hand, but more came, hot and shameful. She hated crying in front of employers. It made her look weak, made her look like she was trying to manipulate them with emotion. But she couldn't stop. Please, she whispered. Please, Mr. Blackwood, I need this job. My son and I will be evicted if I lose this job. We're already behind on rent. I promise you I'll pay every penny. I'll sign something, a contract, whatever you want, just please don't fire me. She knelt down, actually knelt on the Persian carpet, her hands clasped in front of her like she was praying. The humiliation burned through her chest, but she didn't care. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. I'm begging you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, have mercy. He's just a little boy. He didn't understand. He was trying to help. He saw you shivering and he destroyed my property, Preston cut her off. His face was stone. And now there are consequences. $200 or you're both gone. Those are your options. Behind them, Malik had slid down to a sitting position against the bookshelf, his arms wrapped around his knees, his face buried in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. Renee reached into her pocket again, desperately, as if money might materialize through sheer need. Her fingers found lint, a crumpled tissue, a safety pin. Nothing. She turned her pockets inside out, showing Preston the emptiness. I have $17 in my car, she said, her voice breaking completely now. That's all I have in the world until Friday. $17. It's for food. For him. She gestured toward Malik without looking at him, unable to bear seeing her son's face. I'll give you that. I'll give you everything. And the rest on Friday, I swear on my life. That's not what I asked for, Preston said. Renee collapsed forward, her forehead nearly touching the carpet, her whole body shaking with sobs she couldn't contain anymore. She had nothing left. No money, no bargaining power, no dignity. She had failed her son, failed to protect him, failed to keep them safe. Please, she gasped between sobs, please don't do this to us. I can pay. The voice was small but steady. It came from the bookshelf. Renee's head snapped up, her tear-stained face suddenly filled with new terror. Malik, no. Baby, stay quiet. Mama will handle this. But Malik was already standing. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and walked forward, his thin legs carrying him across the carpet until he stood directly in front of Preston Blackwood. The boy's chin trembled, but he didn't look away. He looked up straight into the billionaire's eyes. Preston stared down at the child. Up close, he could see the boy more clearly. The faded shirt with its stretched collar, the patches on the knees of his jeans, sewn carefully by hand, with thread that didn't quite match. The sneakers held together with hope and glue. But it was the boy's eyes that caught Preston's attention. They were brown and deep, and in them was something Preston hadn't seen in decades. Courage without calculation. Sacrifice without expectation of return. I can pay you, sir, Malik said again. His voice was stronger now, though his hands shook. I have something valuable. Malik, please. Renee started to rise from the floor, but Malik held up one hand, stopping her. It's okay, Mama, he said quietly. I know what to do. Malik reached into the front pocket of his jeans and pulled out the toy car. He held it in both palms, like he was carrying something made of glass. The scratched blue paint caught the light from the fireplace. One wheel squeaked slightly as it spun from the movement. "This is the king," Malik said, his voice beginning to crack but pushing through anyway. "My daddy gave it to me before he left. He said it was special. He said one day it would be worth $1 million and I should take care of it forever." Malik paused, swallowing hard. A fresh tear rolled down his cheek, but he didn't wipe it away. "I don't think it's really worth $1 million, he continued, his honesty raw and painful. "My daddy lied about a lot of things, but it's the only thing I have that's mine. It's the only thing I have that's worth anything, and Mama needs her job, so you can have it. To pay for your suit." He extended his hands toward Preston, offering up the toy car. "Please take it, sir," Malik whispered. "It's all I got, but it's yours if you leave Mama alone." Preston looked at the scratched, die-cast car sitting in the boy's small palms. Paint was missing from the roof and hood. One of the doors was stuck shut. The wheels were dirty with years of play. It was worth perhaps $2 at a thrift store, perhaps less. But in that moment, holding that car, the boy was offering everything he owned. 100% of his wealth, his only treasure, his last connection to a father who had abandoned him. Preston reached out slowly and took the car from Malik's hands. It was lighter than he expected and warm from being clutched in the boy's pocket. Up close, he could see where small fingers had gripped it so many times that the paint had worn away to bare metal in certain spots. Behind closed doors somewhere in Preston's chest, something he thought had died 50 years ago began to crack open. "The debt," Preston heard himself say, his voice strange and distant, "is paid." But he didn't move. He stood there, frozen, staring at the toy car resting in his palm. The weight of it was nothing, a few ounces of die-cast metal and plastic, and yet it felt heavier than anything he had ever held. Preston's hand began to shake, just slightly at first, then more noticeably. The car trembled in his palm, and he closed his fingers around it to hide the tremor. But he couldn't hide what was happening inside him. The walls he had spent 50 years building, brick by brick, reinforced with cynicism and validated by betrayal, were crumbling. This child had given him everything, not to gain something, not to manipulate, not to invest in a future return, but to save his mother, to pay a debt that wasn't even his, to stand between someone he loved and suffering. Preston thought of the test he had designed, the cash on the table, positioned so carefully, so obviously vulnerable. He had wanted to prove that everyone would steal if given the chance. He had wanted to catch this boy in the act of taking, to validate decades of bitter philosophy, to confirm that goodness was a myth and self-interest was the only truth. Instead, the boy had given him a coat. Preston looked up from the toy car to Malik's face. The boy was crying openly now, tears streaming down his cheeks, but he stood straight. He had given up his treasure, and he bore the loss with dignity that Preston couldn't name, but recognized immediately. It was the same quality he had seen in soldiers in old photographs, in nurses during plagues, in parents shielding their children from fires. It was selflessness, pure and uncalculated. And Preston realized, with a clarity that felt like a physical blow, that this 7-year-old child in patched jeans and broken shoes possessed something that Preston Blackwood, with his billions and his empire and his 50 years of ruthless success, had never had. Honor. The word came to him like something from another language, half forgotten but suddenly, desperately important. Honor. Nobility. The willingness to sacrifice not because it benefited you, but because it was right. Preston's throat tightened. His eyes, which hadn't produced tears since his father's funeral in 1978, began to burn. He turned away from Malik and Renee, facing the fireplace, gripping the toy car so tightly that the metal edges bit into his palm. "Leave," he said, but his voice came out wrong, hoarse, broken. "Mr. Blackwood?" Renee's voice was confused, terrified of misunderstanding. "Leave the room," Preston managed. "Both of you. Now, before I change my mind." He heard them scramble to their feet, heard Renee's hurried whispers to Malik, her footsteps rushing toward the door. But then, just before they left, he heard the boy's voice one more time. "Sir," Malik said quietly, Can I ask you something?" Preston didn't turn around. He couldn't let them see his face. "What?" "Will you take care of the king? It doesn't like to be alone." Preston's hand tightened around the car until his knuckles went white. "Yes," he whispered. "I promise." The door closed softly behind them. Preston stood alone in his study, a billionaire holding a $2 toy car, and for the first time in half a century, he wept. Not for what he had lost, but for what he had never had. For 50 years of wealth that had bought him nothing. For a lifetime of winning that had cost him everything worth having. A child had taught him what he was missing. A child in broken shoes had shown him what he had become. And Preston Blackwood, standing in a mansion worth $40 million, realized he was the poorest man in the room. 10 years later, on a cold Tuesday morning in November, Preston Blackwood died in his sleep. He was 82 years old. The doctor said his heart simply stopped, worn out after 8 decades of beating. But those who had known him in his final years said something else had changed first. They said his heart had finally started working. The reading of the will took place 1 week later in the oak-paneled conference room of Whitmore and Associates, the law firm that had handled Preston's affairs for 30 years. 15 people sat around the long table, each one dressed in expensive black, each one wearing an expression of carefully measured grief that barely concealed their anticipation. Preston's daughter, Vanessa, sat at the far end, her designer sunglasses still on despite being indoors. His son Marcus checked his phone repeatedly, his leg bouncing with barely contained energy. The board members from Blackwood Industries sat in a cluster, their faces professionally somber, but their eyes sharp and calculating. They had been circling Preston's empire like sharks for years, waiting for this moment. Thomas Whitmore, senior partner of the firm, entered the room carrying a sealed envelope. He was 68, gray-haired, and had known Preston for 3 decades. His face was unreadable as he took his seat at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming," Thomas began, adjusting his reading glasses. "We are here for the reading of Preston Blackwood's last will and testament, revised and finalized 6 months before his death. I must inform you that the contents may come as a surprise to some of you." Vanessa leaned forward slightly. Marcus stopped checking his phone. The board members exchanged glances. Thomas broke the seal and unfolded the document. He cleared his throat. "I, Preston Blackwood, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my entire estate, including all assets, properties, investments, and controlling interest in Blackwood Industries, valued at approximately $12 billion, to Malik James Martinez." The silence that followed was absolute. "I'm sorry," Marcus said finally, his voice tight with confusion and rising anger. "Who?" Thomas continued reading, his voice steady. "Malik James Martinez, currently age 17, is to receive full control of the estate upon completion of his undergraduate education. Until that time, the estate will be managed by a trust, with Thomas Whitmore as executor. All other parties named in previous versions of this will are to receive nothing." "This is insane," Vanessa stood up, ripping off her sunglasses. "Who the hell is Malik Martinez? Is this some kind of joke? That will can't be legal. He was senile. Everyone knew it." Thomas looked at her with the expression of someone who had expected exactly this reaction. Mr. Blackwood was evaluated by 3 independent psychiatrists in the months before his death. All 3 certified him as mentally competent. The will is ironclad. He turned the page and continued. "Preston Blackwood left the following statement. I leave everything to Malik because he is the only person who ever gave me something for nothing. When I was cold, he gave me his coat. When I was cruel, he gave me his treasure. When I was lost, he showed me the way home. He taught me that wealth is measured not by what you possess, but by what you are willing to give away. He is more of a man at 17 than I was at 70. This is not charity. This is payment of a debt I can never fully repay. The room erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped, accusations flew, threats of legal action filled the air. But Thomas simply closed the folder and stood, ending the meeting. In a modest apartment across the city, Malik Martinez sat at his desk, studying for his final exams. His mother had just left for her shift at the hospital where she now worked as a registered nurse, her education paid for by an anonymous benefactor years ago. On the shelf above Malik's desk sat a scratched blue toy car. His phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. "Hello?" Malik answered. "Mr. Martinez," said a voice he would soon come to know well. "My name is Thomas Whitmore. I'm calling about Preston Blackwood's estate. Sir, we need to talk. Your life is about to change." Malik looked up at the king, still sitting on his shelf after all these years, and he smiled. Some debts, he thought, are paid in ways we never expect.